Welcome back to the Ballistic Autistic Podcast, and I am Steven, your host. And, I thought I'd try something a little different. I really wanted to try and stick to some really fun, uplifting, and encouraging stuff that's happening within the autistic community, or things happening regarding autism research or development, or things with pertaining to entertainment. Because, I talked about, certain shows, like perfect example, Love on the Spectrum or Atypical. And, it's kind of nice to see, everyone, they like representation in media. I think people kind of get that. Especially when you're autistic, there's not really a lot of that, especially for people on the spectrum. It doesn't really kind of come up. Some people kind of, I think one of the bigger things was Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. A lot of people are like, oh, yeah, he's very autistic. So he was kind of representation, but it was never really official. I remember when House came out, there was actually an episode where they were discussing whether or not he had Asperger's. I think it was the episode where after he got shot in the neck and he wanted his bloody rug back in his office. So that one was weird. And then I remember the reboot of Power Rangers movie. They had I don't remember the Blue Ranger. They had him autistic. And now they've been popping up more and more. And I mean, it's nice to see, especially for how many people have it. And, how many young people have it. And it's kind of nice to show, like, you don't need to be defined by your disability. There are ways to use it to your advantage. And there's, and it doesn't limit you to doing, things you want to do. And I get that. Which kind of brings me to, like, kind of the things I'm trying to do my best to keep track on, which I want to bring them up when I can in this podcast. So that brings me to a really cool article coming from the Columbus Dispatch. So we have a really cool article about Ohio filmmaker named Matt Swift. He is, or I should say now I'm not 100% sure because I'm just kind of going based on the article, was a student of Ohio State University. And he eventually ended up with strain injuries that affected both his arms permanently, thus affected his dreams of actually working in, Hollywood and movies and all that. And that was when he was younger. Now, Swift is now 42. And he's been working on a film for the last 4 years. And the film title, Where Did It Go? Those Who Spring Me. And it's a really interesting movie because they used an autistic cast for this. And it was really focused on, overcoming essentially the disabilities of these characters. So let's just kind of dive into a little bit of, the overall idea. It's going to have one of the characters named Will, 30-something, who communicates nonverbally. So, to me, it's almost like, it's like that's not a lot of autistic people. But, again, we kind of want the full spectrum of, this is definitely possible. I mean, that adds to the challenge of what he's going to be going through. To me, it's definitely going to be interesting. And then with him, the big plot point of the overall movie is with his autistic girlfriend, whose name will be Tatum, is about having a child together. And the screenplay is actually written by a clinical psychologist named Audrey Todd, whose own teenage son, Liam, is also, as I just said, autistic. So, it's kind of a nice coalition of people on the spectrum, and obviously some not on the spectrum, to collaborate and to just kind of put something kind of different together. I mean, this is definitely gonna be not your typical drama, and it's something that's been recorded across 4 years, so it's definitely gonna be an interesting something put together. Now, really cool, because we're talking about movies now. This other coming from bustle.com, reporting that Greta Thunberg, the now 17-year-old public speaking climate activists would be, I think, fair to say. I mean, I don't know too many people who've not heard of Greta Thunberg. Has a new documentary about her coming out. It's going to be called, and it's going to be on Hulu, called I Am Greta. So it's going to be chronicles the rise of her activism and her, just becoming into the public eye as, you know, as if, someone who's very vocal on climate change. I mean, there's no arguing that. They're not going to hear me argue about that. So let's just not going to want. There's no point. That's not a fight that needs to be made. It's happening. You can make arguments about, her public speaking and, the criticisms she gets or the criticism she makes. Or the criticism of her parents letting sail across the Atlantic Ocean at, what was it, 16? And it's, was it 15 or 16? I don't remember. So, but, and she's been known to call her having Asperger's, and that's what she has identified as being diagnosed with Asperger's, specifically, other than just being on ASD, calling it a superpower. I mean, that's as positive an outlook of, having something that hinders you in some ways, but definitely, I mean, most autistic people I know have definitely a unique viewpoint of, how they see the world, because the world already sees us differently. So, I mean, we're obviously coming at it through a different vector of looking at things. And so it's going to be interesting. I like the quote here. It says here, quoting, I am Greta, takes a different approach, deciding not to portray Thunberg's, God, I hope I'm saying that correctly. I would love to make sure I never butcher that, but it sounds to me like Thunberg whenever they talk. Thunberg, autism as inspiration porn for neurotypical audiences, or an obstacle that she needs to ultimately overcome. What's so radical is that the documentary gives Thunberg's experiences as an autistic person the breathing room to just be. We're able to authentically see how this core part of Thunberg's identity has shaped her life without any larger narrative attached to it. And it sounds like they're really not going to be using it. It's not about the autism. It's not about the Asperger. It's about how, yes, she has it, but having it allows her to have this very unique prospect. And I wish I understood better how all these uses of clips and stuff copyright, because it's still a very technical issue, and since this is still a very young podcast, I do not want to risk getting it pulled down. But Hulu does have a trailer for I Am Greta, and I highly encourage anyone to try and go find it, obviously via YouTube or any other online video platforms. But I'm seeing a link here via YouTube, so it's definitely on YouTube. So just go I Am Greta trailer, Hulu original documentary. Search YouTube, you'll find it. So, and the article still talks about things like atypical, which I've already talked about. It talks about love on the spectrum, I've already talked about. But what's nice here, it talks about through Greta's choice to let Thunberg share her life with autism on her own terms. The documentary serves as a masterclass in the strength of letting the autism community craft their own accounts. So it's really and it's kind of the reason why I'm tying together the two articles is because you're having a really great opportunity of, people on the spectrum represent themselves. It's not, and you kind of get to when you think of certain movies or things that have had a certain backlash. Like I'm taking, for example, I remember the big, people are why can't, it's weird. To me, it sounded weird. It was if you have literally a movie about someone that's a paraplegic or a quadriplegic, why didn't you get someone that was already in a chair? It's Bryan Cranston movie. People gave Bryan Cranston for that, and I love that movie with Kevin Hart. You couldn't find someone that was actually in a wheelchair to act. Well, guess what? Sometimes there's flashbacks where they're walking, and someone who's already a quadriplegic can't act not quadriplegic. So what do you expect them to do? Really, it's just come on. Have a little bit of reasonableness. I mean, pertaining to everything else on the political social spectrum of as far as character portrayal by other characters. There's arguments for those. But let's focus right now. I'm going to be focusing on autism. And it's going to be really interesting, I think, because they actually just talk about here in the article that they're going to be also talking about her reliance on her parents, which mother's name Melina. Gosh, I don't know why I had a hard time. And I'm thinking it's her dad's name is Savante or Savante. Okay, hopefully I did not butcher that. I probably did. I apologize. And what's going to be interesting is just, I think that'll be really important too for parents with autistic kids to just kind of see the enabling of being there as a guide, but not shielding them from everything that this world is going to throw you, because, you may just need to be there to pick up the pieces, because in the end, we all have to have our own life experiences, and some of them are going to suck. You're going to have a bad breakup. You're going to have a job loss or financial hardship or worse things than autism. You may have a car accident that makes you paralyzed. Everyone needs challenges, and everyone also needs a little bit of failure in their life, because that's where you really do learn from you learn from that. I don't know anyone who doesn't learn from their mistakes. I mean, I definitely have. I've had multiple startup small businesses since I was literally 15. I've done car detailing and window washing, and then my first real job was working at a public library, which was completely mind-numbing. I mean, I used to read a ton of books, and I thought I would read more there, which, no, you're supposed to be working. So, that was one heck of a job. Anyway, and it's gonna be interesting. And there's an interesting quote here that Greta Thunberg talks about, and I'm just gonna read it verbatim. Sometimes I feel that it might be good if everyone had a tiny bit of Asperger's, at least when it comes to the climate. And it notes here that she, it's not that she wants people to be disabled. There's no reason for outrage. I mean, again, this is just a unique perspective from a unique individual, and it notes here that it's just that she wishes that she would just see hope, and I think everyone kind of wishes that they would see the same issues, especially when it comes to things that are very detrimental, like the climate, in black and white, because it's a non-issue in the sense that it is something that we all have to work together, essentially. I mean, the sun shines on everyone, right? So there's and I get the complications of it all, and it's hard, I think sometimes it's hard to fathom and wrap your mind around this giant machine of what we call climate. And it really is interesting, because you have your microclimate, and then you have your adjusting of the weather tones, and then it's kind of funny. It's I always thought it was so interesting, the fact that the northern hemisphere has its winter when it's the closest to the sun, but yet the southern hemisphere has its winter when it's the furthest. Or no. Yeah, summer closest furthest from the sun for the north. So it's vice versa. So when Australia has its winter, it's also at its furthest point from the sun, but yet the northern is when it's at the closest. Kind of ridiculous. And then, people want to argue about glacier melts. It's like, come on, get over it. It's genuinely happening. Let's have some pragmatic solutions to, not everyone, having their houses fall down and washed away off these cliffs. Oh, speaking of Australia, uh, this kind of brings up into the other aspect of the science side of what I'd like to bring up. So there is a really cool institute called the Queensland Brain Institute, Queensland, Australia, obviously, of Australia, that they're doing some really cool, interesting research with zebrafish. So this is from ScienceDaily.com. Specifically, they're also known as the University of Queensland. Let's just throw it out of the way. So this article kind of gives a quick summary. What they're doing is studying the zebrafish genetic mutations that they have, which are actually in commonality with Fragile X syndrome and autism. And Fragile X syndrome is pretty interesting because it's actually a new one for me. I have personally never heard of it. But and in case anyone else hasn't, this is just a very basic Wikipedia excerpt of is genetic disorder characterized by a mild to moderate intellectual disability. The average IQ in males is under 55, while about 2/3 of the affected females are intellectually disabled. And then it goes into other physical features of these attributes to the genetic mutation. Now, why they're studying this fish is that they discovered that the neural networks and pathways that produce the hypersensitivities to sound is in both humans and people. So they're studying it because they think that they can essentially target the mutated gene that causes, with people with autism and this other syndrome, I'm going to be, again, focusing on autism, why the brain has this over processing, thus overloading of the brain. So they're hoping that by studying this genetic mutation in the fish and will allow them to eventually kind of figure out more connections. And this leads down to the thing that, some people with autism believe that we don't need a cure, or there shouldn't be a focus on curing us. I guess it could be in that same aspect. I guess my understanding is like some people in the deaf community don't want a cure for deafness. I've kind of brought up my personal opinion. If there's a way to cure it, make life easier, I would probably be more than likely down for that. But okay, so getting back to the research, the main reason that they really like the idea of, or like studying this fish, especially when it comes to in its very embryonic state, is because they're able to examine the entirety of the fish under a microscope, and really, literally, I think it says in here, like they're able to see all the brain cells, and they're able to see all the little connections going on between them. So it's really kind of a cool idea because it's not just fixing something that might be plaguing people with autism, but this other syndrome that I personally never heard of. So it's, the advancement of science is always really cool. And the last bit of news I like to leave off is actually a really kind of a cool one because it's a collaborated study effort between the University of Miami and Harvard Medical School researchers. They're working on a really interesting early detection system. It's actually a hearing test to help detect autism in newborn babies. So it's not really a lot here because it's very, very brand new. They're calling it ABR testing. It's a test that measures the auditory brain response, ABR, auditory brain response, which gauges how well the baby's inner ear and brain respond to sound. Essentially, they're looking for that overstimulating factor, which is why I'm kind of connecting it to that other research on the zebrafish. I thought it was just kind of like a very interesting correlation of, connected studies that maybe down the line in the future they are collaborating with understanding better on early detection. And this is another reason why I like this article, because it really brings up the importance of, I don't know why they call it early intervention, but I guess that's true. Early intervention, because the sooner you recognize that your child has autism, the better off a parent is to start getting them the assistance they need, and the developmental tools that they're going to need, are just learning that, the getting the right insurance, or in the United States with Medi-Cal. So it's been really interesting, the article, because it talks about the research team analyzed nearly 140,000 auditory recordings from babies in Florida, that matched the data with records from the Florida Department of Education indicating children with developmental disabilities. Ultimately, they did find that newborns who were later diagnosed with autism had a slower brain response to sounds during their ABR test. So it has a really good, I mean, at least to me. Obviously, I'm not a scientist. I am a community college dropout. So I am a moron reading smart things, but positive things, I think. So, and they just go on to talk, how autism spectrum disorder is connected to how children process sound, and it can be just processed differently. So, there's really kind of cool research going on there in early detection, which is super vital for, getting the kids the help that they need. And I kind of look forward to, finding updates on that. I'll keep on the lookout for that. So I just want to thank everyone for joining in on this newest episode. If you haven't already seen already, I've moved actually my audio podcast onto YouTube as well, if depending on where you listen to. So if you got YouTube Premium, you can listen to the podcast in the background. God, I thought they were going to have, there was really cool talks about Apple eventually having a new iOS feature where it would override essentially the video playback system. And I think their goal was specifically targeting YouTube, but I think it was actually just going to be any video app. It would allow you to sleep mode your screen, but you could still listen to the audio in the background, which would kind of negate the need to purchase YouTube Premium, but you still have, the stupid ads playing. But hey, technically, with those ads now, hopefully eventually, on the YouTube channel, hey, you'll be making a little money to continue to support. I would love to, to take the time more, as much as I can, to go through these stories and break them down to the nitty gritty. I'm probably not the greatest at it, but I try my best to kind of sift through the information, because I glance through them fairly quickly, but at the same time as thoroughly as possible. At the same time, just focus on the main points, because hey, who wants to spend 20 minutes? I mean, I might as well just read the article at that point. So I don't want to waste my time doing that. I want to get you to the facts and the cool stuff that I like. And if there's something to be excited about, I want to point it out. If there's something to be mad about, I want to point it out more. All right, so in that case, because if you're on YouTube, hit the like button if you really loved it. If you really hated it, hit the dislike button twice. Share with a friend. If you hated it, share with a frenemy. Other than that, love y'all. Peace.